collusion could not be as rife as it is made out. Because if it was as rife as it was made out, the IRA command structure would have been killed within 48 hours. And so we'd gone in, and obviously one of my mates had got the round in. But as we were joking and laughing, my accent was picked up on. I was asked to leave. You know, the fact that I was a soldier serving in the British Army didn't mean anything. In the army, if you're Irish, you're a Mick or a Paddy. We kill people who have killed people to prove that killing people is wrong. Just didn't make sense. It was the first time for me that I truly questioned the futility of violence.
Okay, we went through it a little bit, but the other soldiers that comprised the army that you were part of, obviously you're from the area, so you'd have a pretty good understanding of it. Like if you can gauge like how well of a grasp of the actual history and understanding and the groups involved that these other British soldiers had, like if you would ask them to write like a paragraph on what is it going on here and why are you as a British soldier needed here, what do you think they come up with?
Bollocks, put it mildly. You got to understand that the army is an evolutionary machine. The British Army is an evolutionary machine. So the army arrived in here 69, made huge errors of judgment, they were still of that opinion that, they basically came in here thinking they were, and I don't want to sound racist when I say this, but they were fighting white fuzzy wuzzies. That was their attitude when they arrived here in 69. They very quickly learned that, Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom, and therefore that within Western Europe, you cannot treat the local population as you would someone in Aden or Dhofar or Burma or all those colonial exploits that the British Army had built up its reputation in the 60s and early 70s. So by the time I joined the army, there was huge changes in the training process for any infantryman or anybody coming here. So for example, when I'd have been in training, Bloody Sunday was taught to me as a way not to do business. Bloody Sunday was openly taught to us as, overzealous, over aggressive. It was taught as a wrong way of having to do things as a soldier. So everybody was learning that general gist through what you call army in the contemporary world, which everybody was trained in those days. Before coming on a tour here, everybody did what you call NITAT training, which was specialized training, in mock-up tin cities made of tin that were mocked up to look like areas of Belfast or wherever. And there was one in Lid, there was one in Sennelager in Germany, and so on. And so they went there and practiced tactics for patrolling here, which was very unique to patrolling anywhere. RUC men would be flown over to participate in that training and so on and so forth. But you still take your average grunt, your average Tom, private, whatever you want to call him, and despite all that, and said to him, look, what is the conflict about? They couldn't give you, I don't believe, a paragraph on the history of Ireland. For them, it was simply about keeping, certainly in my era, being piggy in the middle as they saw it, and keeping the warring factions apart as they were taught. And therefore, that means capturing or killing terrorists, whether that be Republican terrorists or whether that be loyalist terrorists. It was all very, very general and vague, but they certainly didn't know anything on the intimacy of the history of this place, and particularly English misrule being a probable cause to the conflict.
I see. Were they generally the type of fellas who just kind of wanted to join the army, or was it the case that they actually cared about going to Northern Ireland and keeping it British in the way that, like, if let's say mainland UK was starting to be invaded by whoever, fellas would join up because they would care about that cause?
No, most lads that join the army are working class lads. The army generally recruits from working class communities. Um, some of them may join for, could have a family history, but most of them are joining because of poverty, because of poor unemployment, and reasons like that. And the army provides them with 3 square meals a day, a roof over their head, and provides opportunities. And the army does do that. So most of the lads that I certainly would have ran into were working class lads like myself, but they largely uneducated, largely just wanting a job and to do the job, and their deployment to Northern Ireland was just another deployment. It could have been, didn't matter if it was Timbuktu or Northern Ireland, it was just a deployment. This is their job, this is what they joined to do, and therefore they were just going to complete their jobs. Now, obviously there was regiments where there was more of an Irish, more Irish people in it. So, for example, the Royal Irish Rangers, would have largely been men from Ireland as a whole, because the regiment recruited north and south. And that regiment would have had a far more in-depth vibe and feel for it. So for example, Johnny Corrigan, who at that time was the CEO of One Royal Irish, before they did their first tour here, he did a brilliant sort of speech, about we do not go to Ireland to settle old scores or to do this or to do that. We go to Ireland as soldiers of our Queen and to do our duty by her. And Johnny Corrigan himself was a Cork man, commanding officer, 1st Battalion Royal Irish Rangers in 1988. I'll get you the speech. I mean, I just can't remember it all off my head, but I will get it for you, and I'll send it to you. But so it depended on the regiment. The Irish Guards would be largely the same. The Irish Guards recruit from here, largely around Liverpool, people of Irish ancestry, so they would be more nuanced. Most of the parachute battalions would have been more nuanced because they recruited, they recruit a lot of men from here, particularly in 3-para. 3-para back in my day would have been, was the jocks in the mix. That's how it was seen, because it was largely made up of Scotsmen and Irishmen. So it depended on but you got to remember that the scales of England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales. So the majority of people in the British Army are English, and the majority therefore just don't know this place. A lot of them didn't even. Certainly, and I met a lot of Englishmen that didn't even know Northern Ireland was part of the United Kingdom.
Right. I was going to ask on that note, did the ones who did know, or even have like a vague idea that it was part of the UK, did they consider ye like proper fellow Brits?
No. I mean, no. No. When I was in training, much to my chagrin, I was called Paddy, Mick, Bog Trotter, you name it, every derogatory thing onto the sun. And I would often stamp my ground, and I'm not Paddy, I'm not Mick. You can call me Glen, Bradley, or Brad, but don't be calling me that. Which invariably usually ended up in a fight, or a huge argument. But no, I mean, the English people don't view us as equal with them. I've never, never. I go back to what I said, when I was talking about when I first joined up. That would have been the era where going out to a pub, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, would have been common. And I can remember going into a pub in Folkestone, the East Kent Arms, and we'd gone in as a group. So there was me and a group of my colleagues, 2 Scousers, a Geordie, Scotsman, 2 other English, and me. And so we'd gone in, and obviously one of my mates had got the round in. But as we were joking and laughing, my accent was picked up on, and I was asked to leave. You know, the fact that I was a soldier, serving in the British Army didn't mean anything. The guy that owned the pub back then was I can't say for certain, but I took him to be a white supremacist, and
Really? Wow.
he certainly didn't want um he didn't want anybody with an Irish accent. And I can remember my friends defending me, you know, and he was basically saying, I don't care, I want this fucking bog trotter out of my pub. Now, that's one incident, but you know, that occurred, um that would be occurring commonly in other places in England at that time. Um, you know, so yeah, I was never, you know, in the army, if you're Irish, you're a Mick or a Paddy. And you know, again, it's different if you're in the Irish Rangers, you know, because obviously we're an Irish regiment. But if you're, you know, then say, for example, as I would have done on courses at the School of Infantry in Warminster, where I'd have been wearing my carbine as an Irish Ranger, and you know, it's very much a put down. Indeed, I can remember myself and another NCO doing really well on the regimental signals instructors course at the School of Infantry, and the officer in charge of the course, a Royal Green Jacket, being absolutely flabbergasted that, as he put it, two bog trotters from Ireland could do so well on the course. And it was purely down to his prejudice that as Irishmen we were thick or something like that there, and here we were winning the bloody course and doing very well on it. And I always, you know, again, little things that stick in your head, but it's one of the things that sticks in my head from the army, you know, that he was, don't get me wrong, he was being complimentary in his way, but he was absolutely astounded that two guys from here could do so well, because his inbred prejudice made him look on Irish soldiers as something that were thick as champ and not worthy, different, whatever way you want to describe it.
I see. Would that ever have an effect on you, like fighting for their army? Would you ever say to myself, Jesus, these people think I'm some bloody thick paddy? What am I doing fighting in their army? You know?
No, that never crossed my mind. You know, I came from, as I said, I come from the Unionist and Loyal Irish community. When I was a soldier, you know, for my notions of nationhood, then I would have gladly laid my life down if it had come to it.
I see. I see. And there have been examples in the past of army, of various security forces, but army as well, colluding with like loyalist paramilitaries. Some of it might take the play or take the form of handing over these like photo montages of people at checkpoints, and there's various other ways. Did you ever hear rumor of it or come across anyone doing it?
The old adage, collusion is not an illusion. If collusion was as rife, the reason I don't believe, well, collusion could not be as rife as it is made out. Because if it was as rife as it was made out, the IRA command structure would have been killed within 48 hours. Because everybody knew who the IRA's players were, everybody knew what they did, or were suspected of, or certainly what our intelligence told us. So if collusion existed to the extent that is often alleged, then it would have been possible to wipe out the entire military command structure of the IRA within 48 hours. And you could have done it with 6 men. 6 men, top team, good weaponry, could have driven around Northern Ireland and to an extent in the south, and within 48 hours killed the IRA leadership. So collusion in often how it's presented, I am not convinced it was at the levels that are alleged, and I'm not convinced it was done in the way that it is suggested. Was there collusion? Of course there was. Of course there was. You know, you don't have at one stage 14,500 RUC men and 8,500 members of the Ulster Defence Regiment who are largely recruited from the Protestant Unionist community that is being subjected to IRA, armed action, suffering, whatever way you want to describe it, and there not be elements that are going to say, you know what, we're doing this ourselves, or we're going to do this ourselves, or we're going to do that, or we're going to do the other. So do I believe that level of collusion took place? Absolutely. Did I ever come across it? No. Did I ever do it? No. But I'm quite satisfied, and that's even based on the historical records of the court service where people have been convicted of it, that certain levels of collusion did exist. But the notion that there was this colluding unit, whatever way you want to describe it, out to get the IRA is pure either conspiracy theory, fantasy stuff, or whatever, because as a fully trained, armed former soldier with experience, you could, if somebody had said go and blessed us, the IRA leadership could have been wiped out in 48 hours.
I see. Was there any operations that you went on, or even like a smaller thing, where you would get back from it and think, Jesus, I was used in something that wasn't quite just, like the person that we the person whose house we tore apart, arrested or questioned or whatever, was completely innocent. That's just one example. But was there anything where you look back on it and think, Jesus, I was being used by. I was being used for something that wasn't right, you know?
No, not in me. You know, you got to remember that when I was 16, I voluntarily joined the army. I voluntarily said, I want to worship at the high altar of violence. And therefore, in my career, you know, if somebody had said to me, Glen, go do ABC, I'd have did it. It was my duty to do it. I wouldn't have questioned the orders given to me. I wouldn't have sat and morosely thought, oh, I shouldn't have maybe done that, or maybe that was this or the other. You know, whenever I was in the army and I was serving here, you know, our role, our general primary role is defined as support the RUC, provide support to the RUC for their operations. But, you know, if we drill down into that, what does that mean? Well, for me, it was very simple. A, capture or kill the terrorists within the rule of law, and B, roll up the communities. And by that, I mean both communities. Roll up the communities that give succor to those terrorists. So does that mean that as a soldier, I would have ran about and been Mr. Nice Guy to everybody? No, it doesn't. That wasn't what I was here to do. And do I have any regrets about things that I did in my service here? No, absolutely none. None whatsoever.
Very good. Okay, so you spent less than a decade of your life in the army, but by no means is anything to define your life by earning like that when you put it in proportion. So like through the course of this almost a decade, when did you become like disillusioned with, if indeed that was the case, did you become disillusioned with what you were doing, or the role of violence as a way to solve this problem that was going on?
My disillusionment came with violence, the futility of violence. And the first great questioning that I had of it was in September 1990. And in September 1990, our 2nd Battalion, the Rangers, Royal Irish Rangers, were serving on the border of South Armagh up into the peninsula. And my uncle, Detective Constable Louis Robinson of the RUC, had been off duty, and he had been away on a fishing trip in County Kerry. And he was coming back across the border when upwards of 18 IRA men, posing and dressed as UDR soldiers, stopped the van he was in and kidnapped him. And obviously, I wasn't stationed, but I was in Northern Ireland serving at the time. So as the story started unrolling, I initially didn't realise it was my uncle. And then it was confirmed that it was Louis. So, you know, for example, at that time, the CEO of the 2nd Battalion was a chap called Fred Allen. God rest his soul, he's dead now. But, you know, Fred had been my company commander. So I was able to go down there from the role that I was doing in Gulf Barracks and participate in on the periphery of the operations to help find Louis's body. But, you know, the IRA held Louis for 3 days. They brutally tortured him. They then hooted him, shot him in the head. Not being satisfied with that, they stripped his body naked, desecrated it further, and dumped it on a border road, wiring it up to a booby trap to kill soldiers who were searching for it. You know, and it was the, you know, so it was me on that border road that informally identified my uncle's body. Once Ado, the Army technical officer, had cleared the booby trap. Jeez. It was me who travelled with his body from the border road up to Belfast morgue, where my father and I and Louis' brother did the formal identification. You know, so I was able, you know, when they did the identification, obviously they could just see his head and did it as you would see in a movie. But, you know, I'd seen his naked body on the road. You know, so I knew what the IRA had did to him. But I remember, you know, just thinking, here was me Uncle Louis, policeman, Royal Ulster Constabulary, following in the footsteps of people in his family side who had served in the Royal Irish Constabulary pre-partition. A man who very much saw himself as an Irishman, you know, comfortably down fishing in County Kerry. Someone who loved traditional music. Someone who in the early days of GAA and the RUC had been an encourager of it. Being brutally tortured, then slaughtered, like in a way that we wouldn't treat an animal. And I can remember going, this has been done by people who are telling him, Louis, and me that we're welcome in their version of Ireland. That we're, you know, I think you gotta remember this is 1990. So by this stage, the provisional movement are saying, oh, but when we said Brits out in the 70s, we didn't mean the Protestants. We meant just the British establishment. You know, we want Protestants in our new Ireland. We want Unionists in our new Ireland, you know. And yet here they are, killing someone in a way that is utterly self-defeating to their cause and what they're stating. And it was the first time that I can remember truly questioning the futility of violence. You know, what violence actually achieves. You know, it's you know, it's also the first time that I remember thinking about, you know, because I was maturing, you know, so, you know, thinking about, we kill people who have killed people to prove that killing people is wrong. And it was just one of those catalytic moments where I went, this is useless. This can't be the way. And I guess those, I then went back after the death of Louis. The army put me offside, and I actually ended up in Kuwait. And this is in the build up to the first Gulf War. And in Kuwait, my job before the ground war started was, I had mentioned that I was a infantry signals NCO. So I was the army had got a new armored personnel carrier called the Warrior. So I was outfitting the Warrior with what you call a signals harness. But it got me out into Kuwait, which incidentally is the best place that I ever got a tan in my entire life. But that's a different story. And I'm in Kuwait, and I'm in a market, and I actually then ran into a bookshop, and it's where I began reading a Sufi poet called Rumi, R-U-M-I, Rumi. So there was this recognition of the futility of violence, and then I started reading Rumi. And Rumi just completely, because I was always an independent thinker, really, really independent thinker. And Rumi just tore my brain asunder on being part of a mob, for want of a better description. And so I toyed, did golf, came back, toyed. And by this stage, I was on what you call open engagement. So I'd initially signed for 6 years in the army and gone on to what you call open engagement, which is basically where you give the army a year's notice to get out. So basically in 1993, I decided I'd had enough, and I gave the year's notice, and I left the army in 94 on the cusp of the cessations, and obviously coming from here and so on. I went back to the area that I came from, and coming from the family that I did, I re-engaged politically, and got involved in politics, but that was a different phase of my life. But it was the murder, the abduction, torture, and murder of Louis was the defining moment where I questioned, and still do, the futility of violence, and the self-defeating method, whatever way you want to call it, that was, Sinn Féin, the IRA, were stating one thing, but their actual actions were completely contrary to what they were stating.
I see. Given that in your life previous to this, when there had been like incidents of extreme violence, be it your bus getting attacked and all these other things you see, that seemed to push you towards the direction of, I need to fight, physically fight against the IRA. In all your reflection and examination, do you have any insight as to why that incident with your uncle pushed you in the opposite direction, when before these type of things sound like they would have pushed you more towards violence?
Well, up until 16, I hadn't traveled. I had grew up in the, I won't say safety because it wasn't safe, but you know what I mean. I grew up in the comfort blanket of my family and my community, and my worldview was defined. My inheritance was defined by what they were saying to me. Obviously, then at 16, I joined the army, and my worldview began to change and widen. After 6.5 years, which is what it was by the time that Louis was murdered, my experience, I'd done things. Louis was murdered in 1990. So what age was I? I'd have been, what, 23? Yet I had done so much in that youthful period of my life, and seen so much. So my worldview had changed. I'd also began reading. You got to remember that when I was at school, we were taught a very specific history that glossed over really important events. So, for example, while 1798 would have been on the curriculum in the United Irish, it was taught in a way that did not embellish the United Irishman, and not just cause of Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter. You know, when I learned about Cromwell at school, he was taught as being the defender of our faith.
Oh wow!
Because history is, so whereas this boy from 16 to 23, whilst he was a soldier, yes, was reading, he was learning, he was evolving, he was remembering what his working class trade unionist grandfather had always taught him: never stop learning, always learn, be learning every day, do something new every day. So my brain, my capacity to understand things was growing. But I think in the specific of Louis, what it was, I was on my fourth tour. That was my fourth tour here. I only did one after that. And, you'd seen the things that had gone on here, the plays, the outplaying of things that had gone on. And I think just to stand there and I think it was really knowing Louis, knowing how proud he was that he was an Irishman, how his hopes were tortured and abused by people who were trying to tell us that they were, at that time, the Hume Adams talks were going on. At that time, Father Reid was doing his bit up in Clonard Monastery. And yet they had butchered and tortured Louis in a way that just said, for me, what it was saying, it just made me question. I just didn't get how you could be saying, no, in a new Ireland, you will be welcome. In a new Ireland, you will be safe. In a new Ireland, we want Protestants to be equal with us. In a new Ireland, we want this. In a new Ireland, we want that. And yet here they were taking an Irish unionist, an Irish Protestant man, and utterly defiling his body. And it just didn't make sense. It was the first time for me that I truly questioned the futility of violence. It's the first time for me, as I say, that I went, you fucking kill people who have killed people to prove to them that killing people is wrong. And it was like, this is a clusterfuck. And it just didn't make sense. And it never left me. It still hasn't left me. I still stand by, as you know, because I went on to become a veteran for peace. The futility of violence has never left me as an absolute. And it just, on that occasion, it just hit home. And then I think what fueled it was going to Kuwait, finding Rumi, 12th century Sufi poet, starting to read him, starting to read about life, starting to widen that philosophical sphere of my life. But when I first read Rumi, it was like, I don't know, I've never had a born again Christian moment, but I assume it would be similar. It was like the strings that had bound up my heart were being undone. And I think it was just the whole combination of that led me to leave the army.
I see. Just one last question on the army. You mentioned there that you're more of an independent thinker. That certainly does come across. I've always imagined that the army kind of isn't really a place for an independent thinker, because to some degree they almost do try to turn you into machine. Maybe in your army it wasn't quite like Full Metal Jacket type training or anything, but a part of their aim is to turn you into a fighting machine that will obey orders and do what you're told and not question it.
Yeah. No, that everything you say there is true. The army take you down, they break you down. and they make you an effective instrument of war. As I put it, they teach you to worship at the high altar of violence. And I did it, and I did it very effectively, and I did it brilliantly for 6.5 years. And then the latter 2 years and a bit, I sort of weaned off it. I wouldn't say I became a problem child. I mean, I never really any big run-ins. You know, I wasn't, you know, you got to remember that by this stage I was a corporal. So I had the sense to know when to have my confrontation, so to speak. But from that moment, I was reading, and I was reading a lot. You know, I was reading a lot in the United Irishman. I was reading Rumi. I was my whole, how could you put it, library changed from sort of reading Wilbur Smith and Sven Hassel to getting very philosophical and everything else. But by 1993, maybe even earlier, I was convinced that this is no longer for me, and I left.
Was there? I assume as an independent thinker, you probably wouldn't have found yourself surrounded by many others in the army, no? No. But there are others. There were others even then. But as the average was by.
I mean, the biggest one I can think of is a chap called, as he liked to say it all the time, Michael Cushnan, originally from up in West Belfast, a Catholic who had joined the Royal Irish Rangers. And Micheál was going through his own experience, but his was more religious. You know, Micheál ended up being a Jehovah's Witness, and he left the army in '96 as a conscientious objector. So yeah, there were other guys there, and again, in any army, you'll always have characters, you'll always have independent thinkers. I think what for me compounded some things at the time, and still does to this day for those that remember me, is, you know, I had come from being this very sectarian kid to joining the army, where I wasn't brilliant in anything, but I was a decent, average, good soldier who was an exceptional infantry signaller, and all that embodied. And then suddenly I was going off down this sort of very philosophical route, and I think a lot of friends at that time had not issues, but they found it hard to understand. But even today, when I talk, you know, so I'll still, if you go on to Twitter, or X as it's called now, and you look at some of the abuse, I get, it's largely by people who just don't understand my journey. It's not, they just don't understand how I think, but every human is on a journey, and I'm not saying mine's special. You know, you have me on here talking about my lived experience, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And for me, the turning point was my Uncle Louis.
Of course. Okay, yeah, I won't keep you all day, but after the army, can you tell us a bit about what being a veteran for peace involves, and what you did in your role as?
Well, I Veterans for Peace came later, but I got out of the army, and I got involved in community activity. You know, it's in our family's blood to be activists. So I joined the Ulster Unionist Party. I participated, I very quickly became the constituency officer for West Belfast, the constituency chairman, sorry, for West Belfast. I became the treasurer of the Ulster Young Unionist Council, and those two ranks of officership give me a place in the talks that led to the Good Friday Agreement. You know, while I wasn't in the main seven that were in the negotiating room, I was certainly the T-boy in the background, giving my input and conveying messages back to West Belfast, and trying to keep people informed and trying to bring people along. You know, I stand by the Good Friday Agreement on everything. It is the basis of our democracy here. It is absolutely the only way that we should be going forward. My only lament is that it hasn't outworked in full. You know, my life cracked on until 1997. So I was doing that politically. I was also building a business and trying to work and get work and develop my fledgling business. But my first wife, Diane, contracted breast cancer in 1997. And back then, they didn't take away the lymph nodes. So within 2 years, the cancer was back, and it was terminal. And our marriage was breaking down anyhow for a variety of reasons to do with me and post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that. There was just a whole compounded area between me. But by 2000, I had left public life completely to focus on being a single parent to my sons, although it only became one son. Only one son came to live with me. And I did that. I then met my wife, Jo, in 2003. I rebuilt my career, my life. And I continued doing that until I retired 18 months ago when I was 55. But I joined Veterans for Peace initially in 1998. Veterans for Peace is a global organization that was born out of the American anti-Vietnam War movement. So you'd sort of the anti-Vietnam War movement initially, and it, believe it or not, continued to 1985. And then the sort of went, well, the American war in Vietnam's over, so we really need to think of something else. So they became Veterans for Peace. They have chapters all over the place. So I had initially joined Veterans for Peace Global. And they're basically, Veterans for Peace is an anti-war movement where military veterans use their voice and experience to help the cause of world peace. I mean, in a general term, that's it. The UK got its own chapter in 2008. The Irish chapter was constituted in 2015, although only came into functioning really in 2018. And I would be the chairman of Veterans for Peace Ireland, where while we obviously have to recognise the Constitution of Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, we recruit both. So, for example, our president is former Commandant Ed Horgan of the Irish Army. Our vice president is Lee Levis, a former private in the Staffordshire Regiment. I'm the chairman. So and we have over 44 active members with, and by active I mean that they would regularly take part in things. On the books, we've just got over 111 members. You can be a full member, an associate member, or an ally. Full member, you got to be a military veteran. Associate member, you could be in the Garda Síochána or the RUC or whatever, the emergency services. And allies are really anybody that wants to support our stated aims, which are very clear and unambiguous, our statement of purpose. So yeah, I mean, that's what I've been doing. And that's why I do what I do still today, because I'm the chairman of Veterans for Peace. Obviously I as I said, I retired in 18 months ago. So it's really all I do to keep myself ticking over,
Fair enough. Only if you'd like to speak about it, but a previous guest of mine, he was actually in the British Army. He has a record for one of the longest sniper kills. His name's Craig Harrison, but he left the army with what he described as chronic PTSD. Really, really bad. If you don't mind going into it, this period of your life from 16 to about 23, 24, what kind of ways do these like PTSD kind of mental scars manifest themselves later on in life, if you're okay to go into it?
Yeah, I mean, anybody that knows me knows that of PTSD. I'm formally diagnosed. I have complex PTSD. My mistake was when I left the army. When I left the army, there was no support, absolutely none. You know, once you walked out those gates, you were on your own. You know, because of Afghanistan, because of Iraq, there is fairly decent support systems for veterans now, but back then, absolutely nothing. So I was having PTSD episodes, largely in the guise of flashbacks and generally depression, putting it mildly, that was related also to alcoholism and alcohol abuse. Now, what I mean by alcohol abuse is that I had convinced myself that I wasn't an alcoholic because I was doing all these great things. I could go in and be a politician. I was running a successful business. Yet I was drunk a lot of the time, or drinking, you know, so I had got myself into a rut where day one, I would be drinking. Day two would be recovery from that drinking episode that may have involved a little more drink. Day three would have been no drink at all, get myself better, and then day four would have been back on it. And that's how I was living my life. But I was also living my life as this, to other people looking in on me, as this very materially well-off guy, you know, because I was achieving in all things. And yet at that moment and that period of my life, I was probably the most unhappiest person in the world within myself. And it was really through a variety of things that I realized what was wrong with me. But in 1996, a Buddhist monk called Thich Nhat Hanh, Tay, as he gets called as his name, but if you're pronouncing it in Vietnamese, it's Thich Nhat Hanh, had visited Belfast. And he had visited West Belfast, and as the West Belfast constituency chairman, I was one of the politicians that had met him. I've been reading Rumi. I had been reading some of his books, so I was really engaged in what he was saying and so on and so forth. And he gave me the business card and looked at the business card, and he introduced me to one of his monks that was with him. And it was one of those real engagements that left a lasting positive and constructive impression on me. I then went through that period where my wife got ill. You know, she got terminally ill, all that brings in a relationship, the breakdown of the marriage, the getting the kids, sorting the kids, only getting one of the kids initially, going through a period of then losing the home, changing the career, and the beginning of rebuilding life. And throughout it all, I was still drinking and having these episodes. And then something just made me go, I really got to sort myself out. I have to sort myself out. And I came across Tay's card. And this is like 2002. And I emailed on the thing. You got to remember, there's no, the web wasn't what it is now, and with no phones like we have now. So I sent off an email, and about a week later I got a response. So I sent off an email. I didn't get a response initially, so I printed the email and faxed it, as you did then. You remember when you sent a fax, you got like that noises it was sending, and it went over to Plum Village, which was a Buddhist retreat in Dordogne in France. And basically they came back to me and said, we want you to come out and we want you to thing. So my mom was still living then, and I said, could you look after the kids while I go out? And I went out for 3 months and basically practiced Buddhism as a novice, which involved a great deal of confrontations and going within yourself. And anybody that has ever done inner reflection, the hardest thing we can do is go within ourselves and to confront who we truly are and have been at times in our lives. And I did that, and I realized, well, the counselors with me over there realized that I was suffering PTSD. They said to me, look, through what you have said, through what you're discussing, through, you know, what we were doing, we believe you're suffering PTSD. We would suggest when you go back home that you get formally diagnosed and you do this and do that, which I did. So I came back after the 3 months sabbatical, and I came rebuilding my life, and that's when I got formal diagnosis. But it was again a nightmare to get done. You know, to push to get a psychiatrist for one in the NHS to get the and then I began the process of healing properly, you know. But it was really Buddhism confronting alcoholism in my life, and I'm by no means, I still very often fall with alcoholism. It is still a problem in my life, you know. I haven't you know, I am a recovering alcoholic. But people will again look and say, "Jesus, he's done this, he's done," but it doesn't matter. You know, if you can't go through life without needing a drink, that's alcoholism. That's being an alcoholic, and I had to really confront that, and still do every single day, one day at a time. I have to do, you know. So like, I went for a period there of 2 years where I didn't have a drink, and then just 1 minute, one instant, just I'll have one. And then day one begins all over again. And that seems to be where I am with that. My PTSD, while it's not cured, it never gets cured. I'm managing it well. But again, I need support. I still need support. And again, it's not there. It's not freely given. It's not freely available. You've got to push for absolutely everything. Like, for example, I've put in for some stuff lately. The Victims Pension Board that is up here, the application's been in over 2 years. War pension with the MOD, the application's been in with them over 2 years. And you just get pushed around from pillar to post. But yeah, you know, I have complex PTSD. I go into very dark places sometimes. And it could be the slightest thing triggers it. You know, my last big episode was when my sister died. My sister died in 2018, and in July 2018. My mom died in August 2017, and then my younger sister died in July 2018. Less than a year later, and it really hit me. The dark clouds came in, and I was in a shop, and this is going to sound so funny. I looked at a packet of beef mini chips, you know, the packets of crisps, which our Carrie, my sister, used to love. And in a moment, and I don't know if I was standing for 2 minutes or if I was standing for 20 minutes in that shop staring at those crisps, but I was just going back and 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 right back until that bomb in 1972. And that never leaves me. You know, the incident I've described about the crisps with Guy, you know, that's one. You know, another time was being on the train going to Dublin, and the sound of the tracks, and that, whatever way it went, I had Morse code in my head, and then I was back at something, and then again, because for me it never goes back to one incident. That goes, there's this, and again, I'm in this world where I don't know, was that a split second, or was that 20 minutes, or was that 10 minutes? You know, it just, and that's how my PTSD gets me. Yeah, it gets me. But yeah, I mean, in that period of the late 90s, the times that I thought of suicide were crazy. I did attempt it once, was in the hospital, but no, it just wasn't, you know. And again, that's, you think of the stuff that gets said to your ex or whatever for taking a principled stand, and it's by fools that know absolutely nothing. Like there was some guy the other day on X. I had done an engagement on last week up in the James Connolly Visitor Centre, and Mark Simpson, the BBC reporter, had done a sort of tweet on it, and this fool had come on and said, you know, about me, he was never in the British Army. He's an IRA supporting cunt. You know, and you're just looking at it and going, like, anybody can check if I was in the British Army. You know, it's verifiable. It's, you know, and they even suggest that, you know, at that period of time, I would have been supporting the, you know, it's just, it's a lunacy. But these people don't get what it could do to someone who, like me, who suffered complex PTSD. But that's how it gets to me, John. It's, you know, thankfully the worst of it, I hope, is behind me. But I don't, my alcoholism still plagues me, and I openly talk about it. But it's, for me, it's one day at a time. And you know, at my age and as I'm getting older, those the one day at a times do become easier as I get older.
Very good. Thank you very much. Now, everything you shared with me, I appreciate it very much. Very articulate. I might just ask you one more thing. When you tell people, like especially in the north, I suppose, that you used to be in the army, do you get a vastly different response from Catholic, Protestant? Do some people see it as a terrible, terrible, traitorous sin, and others as a good thing?
It depends on the audience. You know, I as you said during this interview, the army is one part of my life. You know, and I myself, so when I left the army, as I said, there was no support structures, there was nothing. So for me, that door was closed in my life, and I generally went ahead and built, as I said, successful businesses. And I either built the companies myself from greenfield site and made them a success, or I went into a corporate where I was an asset. And I did that without having to be, oh, I'm a former soldier. You know, so that in my life, you know, if you think about it, you know, I've worked 39 years. I worked continuously for 39 years. The army would be the least part of that. You know, I was 30 years in business. So that's what I'm known as in mostly in Northern Ireland, is this business guy. You know, so, oh, Glen Bradley, oh, you mean the chair of the Business and Human Rights Forum? You mean Glen Bradley that was on the council of the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce? So I have that knowledge. Where the former soldier thing seems to get used more is actually by Irish nationalists, Irish Republicans. You know, they seem to get hung up on, oh my God, he was a former Brit. You know, he was a former soldier. And it's funny, I was doing a thing with young Sean Murray a couple of months ago. You know, and I had to say, you know, because he's going on about the parachute regiment and blah, 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 you know, and I had to say to him, you're banging on there about the parachute regiment in my association. I didn't serve with the parachute regiment in Northern Ireland. And he went, oh, I thought you did. And I went, no, never. You know, so there's this perception of within the Irish Republican nationalist community where they seem to latch on to former soldier, you know, and I get it. I get it, but you know, for me, the army was a part of my life. I don't regret it. I'm very proud of my military service, and I know that this discussion has been a lot about that. But the reality for me is that it has a time and a place for in my life's journey. You know, so for example, if I know we can't do it in this talk, but you know, if you were to talk to me more about my attitudes now and Veterans for Peace now, you know, a lot of that really flows from that time that I spent in Plum Village. You know, my thought process now and how I integrate now and how I behave with people now, it was born out of that and has nothing to do with the army or that period of the army. So it depends. A lot of people hold the army in high regard and therefore would use the title former soldier to draw attention to a part of my life that probably does not compute with what I do now. And that's fine. I've no problem with it. You know, I would often get comrades would say to me, why do you have to keep saying about the army? And I go, but it's not me. I don't. You actually say about the army, you know, and I actually have a little Veterans for Peace business card, and there's a cloud bubble in the back of it. And, you know, it does have former soldier there, but there's 12 other things that I am, you know, so the army is one facet of me, and it depends who I'm talking to, the reaction that I get. And I've no problem with that, you know, and I do talks very often where it will be a former volunteer of the IRA, a former volunteer of the UVF, and me as a former soldier. But those talks are very specific to the period of conflict and our life's journey experience. You know, and that, again, that's fine. But, you know, I'm today more about conflict resolution and conflict transformation. And that's the peace work, the peace activism that I'm involved in. Does being a former soldier help? It enables me to understand other former soldiers and their experience and have empathy. But, you know, I don't really use that soldiering experience within that field of conflict resolution and conflict transformation, other than to be able to identify with people when they're in a conflict mindset still. So it depends on the audience, to be truthful, John.
Of course, of course. Thank you very much. Now, everything you shared, all the insights, I appreciate it greatly. Now, I'm sure my audience will too. Any just final thoughts you want to leave us with at the end of all this? Maybe something you wanted to get out that we didn't ask.
Just that, you know, all of us here, all of us throughout the world, need to have empathy. You know, it's about growing up and respecting diversity, understanding that we are all multifaceted and different. And where we come into areas like ours and here in Northern Ireland, it's having the ability to walk in other people's shoes and sharing that empathy. And then from that, recognizing our common ground as humanitarians. You know, that's what it's about. For me, it's about having that peace of mind. You know, when I have young veterans of the Afghan wars or Iraq come to me in Veterans for Peace, and they're full of boisterous activism and they're wanting to go do this, and I'm like, settle petal. You know, in order to be a veteran for peace, you have to be a veteran at peace. You know, go away and work on yourself, because until it's in there, until peace is in there, you've got peace at heart, peace at mind, you're not going to think peace. And I'm beyond this, you know, there's a lot of people talk peace, but their demonstrable actions would make you question if they're committed to peace. We've loads of them here, loads of examples of that in Northern Ireland. You know, I'll work with anybody who wants to create authentic peace and roll out the Good Friday Agreement as our form of democracy. And that's what I'm about, John.
Very good. Thank you very much for everything. Like I said, appreciate all the time, memories, and thoughts you've shared. But probably, honest to God, I'm not just saying it, easily one of my best interviews.
Oh, thank you. Thank
one
you.
of my
Well,
most one of the guests that's definitely most in touch with his own thoughts and feelings. It comes across.
okay. Thank you very much, John.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much, mate. Go on,
All right.
enjoy your day.